Hi, welcome to my super simple ASP.NET web development tutorial. This is my first attempt at a video tutorial series. This tutorial assumes that you have a working knowledge of C#. I will try not to assume too much concerning JavaScript, but you should be familiar with JavaScript as well. Regardless, I'll try to take it slow. I am using a Windows XP virtual machine out of convenience, but you will need the Microsoft .NET Framework 4.0 or higher, Visual Studio 2010 Express or better, Internet Explorer 8.0 or higher, and this tutorial will be using both Web Forms and MVC version 3.0. Links to these resources will be posted in the video description. Let's start with some background. Microsoft offers two frameworks for developing web applications using ASP.NET. ASP.NET Web Forms and ASP.NET MVC. Web Forms was initially released in January of 2002. It allowed Windows developers the ability to create web applications without any knowledge of the web. Web Forms allows for rapid application development, allowing developers to drag and drop controls on a web form. Web Forms has a low learning curve and does not require knowledge of HTML, CSS, or JavaScript to get started. In my personal experience, most ASP.NET web applications, as of this video, are written using Web Forms, so it's a valuable framework to know. Following the success of Ruby on Rails and other MVC web development frameworks, Microsoft's ASP.NET MVC framework was initially released in December of 2007. MVC is HTML5 compliant and works well with the stateless nature of the web. MVC allows developers full control over the markup generated by the framework. MVC plays well with JavaScript libraries like jQuery and is well suited for Ajax. MVC enforces the model view controller paradigm, which is modular and follows the process of separation of concerns. MVC is designed from the ground up to enable unit testing and to be pluggable so that any part of the framework can be overridden. The source code for MVC is available for download. Both frameworks have a few things in common. Both Web Forms and MVC use HTTP, or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, for communication between your browser and the web server. They also use both JavaScript for client functionality. In the end, all of the output from both frameworks ends up as HTML and JavaScript. This tutorial is not aimed at explaining in depth the HTTP protocol, but here's a very simple sample of what an HTTP request from the browser as well as an HTTP response from the web server looks like. Regardless of whether you are using Web Forms or MVC, traffic between the browser and the web server does not deviate far from this example in most cases. Let's start by creating a simple Hello World application in both ASP.NET Web Forms and ASP.NET MVC. Over the course of the series, we will create a more complex web application in both frameworks. This will allow us to examine the differences and achieve a more rounded understanding of web development using ASP.NET. We'll begin by creating a Web Forms application in Visual Web Developer 2010 Express. If you have the professional version of Visual Studio 2010, that is the only product you will need to use. Let's click the File menu in the upper left corner, select New Project, make sure to select Visual C# if it's not already selected, select ASP.NET Web Application, which is a Web Forms application, and we'll name it Hello Web Forms. We'll leave everything else the same and click OK. Your Web Forms application will usually be hosted on Microsoft's IIS web server. When a user visits the root of your Web Forms website, IIS looks for a default page to serve the user. Default.aspx is configured to be the default web page and is the first page your users will see. So if a user visits http://mysite.com, then both that and mysite.com/default.aspx will be directed to the default.aspx web page. The default Web Forms template creates your first web page using a master page, which is very handy, but let's create a new page called Hello World to keep things simple for now. So we'll right-click on the project, click Add, New Item, and select Web Form. Let's name this web form Hello World.aspx. Click Add, and here we have an empty web page. We'll add some sample text in the body of our web page. Notice that web pages and web forms end with the extension ASPX. This is because in web forms, web pages almost always correspond to a particular file stored on the server. It would be difficult and unusual to try and remove the ASPX extension from web forms web pages, so it is easy to recognize many websites that use web forms by this telltale extension. Let's take a look. I hit play, or the continue. It starts up my web project, opens it in my default browser, which happens to be Chrome. And here's our very simple web page. Now let's create the same Hello World page in an MVC project. I'm going to open a separate instance of Visual Studio and again select File, New Project. This time I'm going to select ASP.NET MVC3 Web Application. I'm going to name this application Hello MVC and press OK. And then I'm going to select Internet Application, which will give us some default routes and some pages, and it will use forms authentication. Most of this we won't use right now. We'll select the Razor View Engine and opt to use HTML5 semantic markup. Some of these options may be selected for you already in the professional version of Visual Studio. When a user visits the root of an MVC website, IIS looks for a default page using MVC's routing conventions. Think of the text between slashes as parameters sent to your ASP.NET application. The first parameter determines which controller will handle the request. If there isn't one, the parameter will be sent to the default controller route. The second parameter determines which C# method or controller action will be executed for the given controller. Again, if there isn't one, a default action will be executed. Let's run this sample project and see this. Notice that the root of my website goes to this index page. If I go to my website/home, it also goes to the index page. Home refers to the controller. My website/home/index also goes to this index page, which is the action. MVC defines some default routes for us in our global.asax file. Let's expand that and look at the code behind file, and you'll see on line 20 we have a register routes method which is called by line 37 under application start. When our application first starts on IIS or locally when we're debugging it, register routes will be called one time. MVC defines a default route to point to the controller home, the action index, and has an optional ID parameter which we'll look at later. So because index is the default action, requests to our website/home will be directed to this action. MVC's routing allows MVC web applications to be flexible and adapt to different IIS configurations in different environments. For example, after a migration between development, staging, and production environments, or between servers, keep in mind that all MVC requests are first passed to your controller. The controller then selects which view to render to the browser. There's an index.cshtml file under Views and then Home, which corresponds to the default.aspx file in our Web Forms application. MVC routes do not always correspond one-to-one to a file stored on the server. Like the Web Forms master pages, MVC's Razor has layout pages. Let's create a simple MVC Razor view that does not use a layout page for the sake of simplicity. Right-click on the Home folder, select Add, View, uncheck Use a Layout or Master Page, and call this view Hello World, just like our Web Forms application. We'll leave Razor selected as the view engine, and press Add. And here we have a simple web page. We'll add some text to the body of our web page. We can try to execute this page we've created, but this will not work because our home controller does not have any action corresponding to the Hello World page. Let's look at the home controller. Controllers in MVC will be found under the Controllers folder. Let's expand that. Look at the home controller. Notice that we have two actions defined, index and about. If we were to visit our website /home/index, because we're looking at the home controller and we have an index action on this controller, that would work. Or if we went to /home/about, that would also work. So let's add a Hello World action to our home controller. Before you do this, you'll want to stop the project. So it'll be a public action result Hello World. And for the view, we'll simply return view. MVC works by conventions, so a lot of stuff just works for you. Because of the convention using the views folder, MVC knows to look inside this views folder, then in home, which corresponds to the home controller, and then the Hello World file, which corresponds to our Hello World action name. Now let's hit play, or continue. We can now navigate to /home, which is the controller, /Hello World. And here we go. There's our Hello World MVC web page.